You're watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.
Starting next year, Hyundai dealers will be able to sell vehicles through the Amazon platform, with other brands set to follow. Joining us now to discuss this partnership and what it could mean legally for dealers is Len Bellavia, founding partner of the law firm of Bellavia Blatt, also known as dealerlaw.com. Len, thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Jim. Thank you.
Sure. So there's a lot of concerned dealers out there. You know, whenever you throw the word Amazon in with anything automotive, obviously the hairs on everybody's back goes up, and it's like, uh-oh, what does this mean? Are we going to be dealing with Amazon? Are we going to be competing? Are they going to take more of the share? Do they want to get involved in the, right down to the sales process and lead gen and all those great things? So now we hear Hyundai and Amazon are formed a partnership. So talk to us about this. What does it mean legal? Or could this violate state franchise laws?
Sure. So I guess the big question is this really a Trojan horse? It sounds good. Dealers understand they have to get into the 21st century, and manufacturers and consumers have been trying to find a better way to transact auto sales and leasing. The question is, though, in one respect, it's great that Amazon, the online leader in retail sales, is getting involved. The problem is in its execution. So the devil is in the details, and it could portend major problems for franchise dealers, or maybe after this pilot project, the kinks will be worked out. But on its face, as of today, even with the little information that even Hyundai franchise dealers have, it's all been very, hush-hush about the details. There are problems. And I guess the ultimate question, at least what I get when Hyundai dealers call me, is this program legal? Does it violate any state franchise laws? So I try not to get too involved in the marketing. Is this good for sales? Because that's not my lane, so to speak. So the question is always, does this violate state franchise laws in its early stages? Now, given the fact that this is, I guess you'd call it the embryonic stage, it's being test piloted or beta tested starting in January. My concern is it doesn't appear, based on what I'm hearing, that this has been vetted. Start with the premise that Amazon obviously appeals to shoppers. You can compare this to getting things delivered in 2 to 3 hours, but this is not, this is not groceries or dog food or, this is a very complex transaction. Buying a car, putting all the issues aside about, how can we improve the process, very complex. It's no different than buying a house. So you can't just click a button, wait 2 hours, get the car, see if you like it, and if not, take advantage of Amazon's very friendly return policy. So all of the traditional benefits of the Amazon business model don't exist here. So what I would have hoped is that Hyundai would have really gone through this process far more thoroughly than it has been, and I'll give you some examples, and involved the dealers, because whether you like the buying experience or not, there needs to be a concession that auto dealers are the experts in retail sales. Okay, so using that as a predicate, why weren't dealers invited to the table? Because what dealers are saying to me is, look, they haven't even addressed the most fundamental components of buying a car. I'll give you an example. 60% of buyers or lessees have trade-ins. Yet when you ask dealer counsel or Hyundai, what about that? They have no answer. So how do you come to market? Even given the fact that this is a test case.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Once they launch it, right? They're making national announcements. The public knows about it. So even though it might be a beta test, perception is reality. So consumers, forget dealers for 1 second. I'm not here to advocate on behalf of consumers. That's not my role. I represent dealers. But even as it relates to consumers have become familiar with the Amazon brand as being transparent, expedient, consumer friendly, and with the ability to undo the deal, so to speak, and return, no questions asked, and to get a refund. None of that applies to buying a car. It's just impossible to buy a car and get it delivered the same day. You got trade-ins, you've got financing. Those two things alone is why the process is so painful, right? Because it takes time to do that. But from what I'm told, Amazon and Hyundai have not addressed those two components. The trade-in, well, just think if you're a consumer, you're celebrating this new platform where you don't have to go in and endure the painful process of buying a car. So I'm going to go I'm going to go to Amazon so I can avoid all that. But what happens? You tell Amazon online that you have a trade-in, and the whole system breaks down because Amazon's not in a position to address a trade-in. So what do? They refer you to the dealer. Well, doesn't that defeat the purpose of this whole platform, not to have to go to the dealer?
Right.
So they're telling you right out of the gate that you have to deal with your local dealer to appraise a trade-in. Using
Why
Hyundai,
do you think they did this ready, shoot, aim approach in the launch of this very important pilot program? I mean, it seems to me that they've been, just irresponsible in this whole deal.
Well, look, manufacturers are very sensitive. It's a pain point that state dealer associations advocate on behalf of dealers, and there are state franchise
Right.
statutes in every state. So
Right.
I think, if I had to speculate, because I'm not sitting in a boardroom at Hyundai, they said, well, if we get the dealers involved too early, it's going to create a lot of consternation. They're going to call their lawyers, and we're going to have injunctions flying all over the country, to try and put this project on hold. So let's ambush them.
Yeah.
So even the head of National Dealer Council for Hyundai has conceded that he wasn't even made aware of this until only a few hours before Jose Munoz made an announcement on national TV.
Wow.
So what does that say?
Wow, that's a kick
Hyundai
right in the.
hasn't even told their head dealer. They weren't planning on telling him until moments before they made the announcement. So
That's crazy.
So that may be cynical, a point of view, but my view is if the whole predicate of Amazon is transparency, why wasn't Hyundai transparent with their dealers? What are they hiding?
Right. Right.
So that's the first sort of point on this whole project.
Yeah. Yeah. How is it different from an Auto Trader, Cars.com, or Car Gurus?
So those platforms, for the most part, don't partner so directly with the OEM. Those are third-party lead referral sources where much of the transaction is still left to the dealer. It's more transparent because there's information on there as to equipment and pricing. It's not a fixed price, so that's maybe why it's not the perfect solution, but it still leaves the integrity of the franchise system intact. And keep in mind, Jim, because I get this question all the time, well, isn't this just pro-dealer protectionism? The unnecessary middleman is benefiting because they have political clout and they've gotten all these protections. Well, yes, those statutes exist because of the imbalance in the leverage of the franchise dealer versus the manufacturer. But the incidental beneficiary of these state franchise laws are consumers. Consumers need help, and they need help on the ground level in their local dealership, because to negotiate a trade-in or get help with financing, keep in mind, Hyundai is an entry-level product. The demographic oftentimes is first-time buyers who have not established good credit yet, or people who just don't have good credit. How is that going to be handled on a platform where Hyundai has already announced that it's only going to provide financing to consumers through its finance arm, Hyundai Credit, Hyundai Finance? That's not fair to consumers because that's not a subprime lender, and many of Hyundai's customers are subprime borrowers. So at the dealership level, any dealership's going to have at least 4 or 5 options for financing so that someone with bad credit can still consummate the deal. So that's another wrinkle in the process. That the idea is that they're making this sound so pure and simple and lily white, when in fact, especially with Hyundai buyers and any entry-level model, there's a lot of work that needs to be done behind the scenes to get the vehicle delivered. So that's why I say I think they kind of rushed this forward. And as I've said to dealers, look, what's going on now with Hyundai is just a precursor of what's likely to happen with all manufacturers, because Amazon doesn't just dip its toe in the water. If they're engaging Hyundai, I'm sure they're engaging other manufacturers. So even non-Hyundai dealers really have to pay close attention to this, because the elements of this platform, in my opinion, erode the front end side of the business.
That's right.
Because not only can dealers not establish their own pricing, I mean, theoretically they can post whatever price they want on this platform, but they're not going to participate in the financing. So there goes the finance reserve. I'm told they're not going to participate in extended service contracts and after sale generally. So there goes the back end of the deal. So it leaves very little if the front end gross, the finance reserve, and the back end F&I is eviscerated, what does that really leave the dealer? I mean, they could establish their own pricing, but even at that, maybe it won't be list price, but it can't be below MAP, the minimum advertised price, which is probably where the pricing is going to land, but that doesn't leave a lot of gross profit on the front end for Hyundai dealers. So
Right.
it essentially cuts off the entire profit structure at the head and leaves only service and parts and fixed ops as the profit centers. So if I'm a Hyundai dealer, and if I'm a dealer of any other brand, I'm very dubious of the rollout. And I think the bottom line is what I'm saying is dealers need a seat at the table with Amazon and their OEM to craft this e-commerce platform in a way that's meaningful to consumers and doesn't violate the franchise laws and essentially make dealerships non-profitable. Keep in mind, this all comes on the heels of Hyundai pressuring dealers over the past 5 to 7 years to renovate their facilities. And the average cost of that was $3 to $5 million to build image compliant facilities. So how do you impose that requirement and then take away the profit center from the dealers? And that's why I think dealers are skeptical of whether this is a Trojan horse is the term, whether this is an attempt to try and reduce the number of dealers in the network or eliminate, or if this is a first step towards an agency model where dealers just become relegated to being a delivery center.
Right.
There's a lot going on here, and that's why I think lawyers like myself are getting a lot of calls and say for advice on whether we should just wait and see, whether we should put a stop to it, and try and get a seat at the table so that this thing can be crafted in a way that makes sense for all of the constituents. Hyundai, Amazon, the dealer, and the consumer.
For sure, and I understand it's going to be just a select group of dealers, right, for this pilot program.
Initially, it'll be 18 dealers. In 5 different states. Even in those limited number of states, there are violations. I mean, if you look at one aspect of the model, well, leads will come into Amazon and they'll be directed to one of these 18 dealers. Well, that in and of itself violates the franchise law in most states, because although manufacturers are permitted to have lead referral systems, they must direct those consumers to the dealer in the market area where that consumer resides or works.
Right. That's an unfair advantage that those other dealers have.
Yeah.
Right.
And all of the articles I read about this are more directed towards marketing and consumer experience. But the real problem here is that dealers, now I'm speaking only about franchise dealers and their rights here, is that the model can be crafted in such a way where it's engineered to make dealers look less sales effective. Because if they have no control over where customers are being sent, and dealers are being sent by Hyundai and Amazon to dealers outside the market area where they live, well, what does that really do at the end of the month when manufacturers are sending the sales metrics and sales efficiency reports? It looks as though there's an inordinate number of pump-ins into the market area of the dealer, and that's very easy to now classify that dealer as sales ineffective.
That's right.
Now, the dealer has a perfect excuse. Well, it's your fault. You created this model where my consumers in my market area are being redirected somewhere else. But I mean, that argument may surface 6 months or 12 months from now. Do you really think Hyundai is going to say, or any OEM, I'm not picking Hyundai, they're going to say, well, yeah, it's our fault, so we'll excuse your sales deficiency. So what I'm saying is, it could, if there is a diabolical plan here, and I don't know that there is, but if I were to be a cynical person, I'd say, look, this is really a way to craft the sales effectiveness of dealers to be artificially deficient so that the manufacturers have a basis to seek termination. Now, that's a gloom and doom scenario. I'm not saying that's the actual, but we have to look at this thing now before it's unrolled, because once it's in the marketplace, it's very difficult to unscramble that. So
well, and especially if the consumers like what they see on their end, even if it hurts the dealer, the consumer's not going to care. The consumer's not going to care about the dealer's pocketbook or the longevity of the dealership or the industry or anything else. They're only going to be concerned with how easy it is and if it saves them money. And
that's right.
They don't care about their local dealer that much. When push comes to shove, they only care about their own pocketbooks and how easy it is to acquire their next vehicle.
Yeah, the pain point for consumers will not be at the outset, because I agree with you.
Right.
As long as they get convenience and speed and reliability and
Right.
comfort with the Amazon brand. However, the net result of it may be that dealers will wind up not being able to survive economically. And then consumers will say, hey, I just killed the goose that lays the golden egg, because the sale process is one thing, but there's a 5-year warranty. And now, I'm in year 3, my dealer's out of business because he couldn't sustain himself under this type of a model. Now, where do I get my car serviced? So they may not feel the negative impacts of this for years down the road, but if this is indeed a mechanism to try and starve out dealers economically, then ultimately consumers will be disadvantaged because they won't have dealers as close to where they live or work as they do now.
Perhaps. And the reason I say that is because if in the event that Hyundai, just using Hyundai as an example, if that were to happen, there'd be, regional service centers, or there would be an acquisition of a Pet Boys that says, oh, take it to your nearest Pet Boys and we'll do all your warranty work for you. I mean, there's certain ways around that serviceability of the vehicle, if you think at a grander scale than just having, the local Hyundai dealership handle the service of that vehicle. I mean, I'm obviously in the auto industry for 40 years, and I wish that was it. But unless we start to think more creatively and outside the box as dealers, we're going to get in trouble, because these disruptors will come into our industry and say, haha, we just touched a hot button with consumers, and guess who they like more? They like us versus liking you, and here are the reasons. So in my humble opinion, we've got to step it up in a number of areas. We got to make sure that these deals don't happen, and if we can't prevent them from happening, because listen, attorneys have lawyers, right? Dealers have lawyers, but so does Amazon. So, and I'm sure that this isn't their first barbecue. They've looked into this long term to say, okay, if we're going to get into bed with an OEM, what does this look like down the road? And as you know, Jeff Bezos has made it clear that he's been looking to get into the auto industry, in one form or fashion or another. And I just, I caution all dealers right now to, pay attention to this, because this is, all of a sudden, you let the door open a little bit, and before you know it, you've got a different model on your hand as a dealer, as a dealership.
That's right.
To your point,
That's
you
right.
mentioned the word agency, which Europe is already experiencing with some OEMs. And guess what? Now it's too late. Everyone said, when Elon Musk came out with Tesla, oh, that won't last. They're losing money. They can't make it. Nobody buys a car over the internet. There's no service centers, to speak of. And we heard a lot of those same arguments. Well, lo and behold, they are by far the number one retailer of EVs nationwide, by far. And, here we are 15 years later. So, all of these things we've heard before. We heard CarMax wasn't going to stay in business because who wants to buy a car at sticker price? And, they'd rather buy them from franchise dealerships. And when I hear these things with Amazon and Hyundai getting together, I just, cringe, because I think we're going to be having this discussion a few years from now going, oh my God, can you remember when this first happened with Hyundai? And now it's every single OEM is with Amazon, and dealers are shaking their head going, what just happened to our franchise? It's not the same setup that we knew.
We're at a crossroads, there's no question. However, I think dealers can wind up in a good place if they make certain acknowledgments. And one is they have to concede, and I argue with my own clients, on this, they have to concede that they made missteps during COVID by overcharging consumers.
Yes.
And that set the backdrop.
I would agree wholeheartedly.
Yeah. I have clients that will debate me on this, but
I know.
think
I've got a million visitors to my show, and we go back and forth on it. But I'm on your side. I think that we did hurt ourselves in this area.
Mm-hmm. And even putting that issue aside, it is not the process of buying a car is not pleasant.
Right.
It's just even if you just talk about the time investment.
I know.
Even if you deal with very nice people, it's not pleasant.
Yep.
So dealers have to come to terms with that and say, all right, maybe the Amazon opportunity is a nice way to get into e-commerce because it's a credible player. Everyone knows it and likes the process.
That's right.
But how do we participate? Now, this is where I think the rubber meets the road, so to speak, because there is a strategic way to get both things done, meaning concede that it's a time for change, but also recognize that dealers have this one final opportunity before this goes live and they lose control of this.
Right.
That is to utilize the franchise laws, because even though Amazon is huge and has, buildings filled with lawyers, and so does Hyundai, the fact is that dealers have all the ammunition, and that is the franchise laws. I mean,
Right.
let's look at the same OEM, Hyundai, several years ago, tried to circumvent the franchise laws with Genesis and treat, them as two separate franchises. And the franchise laws worked to the dealer's advantage.
Right.
And Hyundai wound up spending billions of dollars losing that lawsuit, or that claim, so to speak.
Right.
So the dealers aren't powerless. Quite honestly, they have more clout here than, this may seem outrageous, but they have more legal clout than Amazon and more clout than Hyundai. The question is, will they invoke their rights? Because if they were to be strategic about it, they should put the plan on hold and say, we like the idea, but you can't go to market without our involvement. Because if we put it to rest and we get injunctive relief because you are violating the franchise laws, we're all back to square one, including the dealers.
Right.
So dealers have to come to terms with the fact that the process needs to change. It's great news that Amazon may spearhead this, but they should assert their rights by saying, hold the phone, we want a seat at the table. Let's get the largest dealers across the country to sit at a table with Amazon and Hyundai for as many meetings as possible. Because when you speak to someone at Amazon or even Hyundai, they haven't thought of these things. So they're not market experts. I mean,
Well,
Amazon is a market expert, but they're not automotive experts. Otherwise, they would have addressed these things
Right.
about trade
And
equity.
the notion that they didn't bring in the president of the Hyundai dealer council tells you, is there something a little more sinister going on here? To your point, let's hurry up and do this, and then kind of let the dealers kind of shake their heads and figure out what just happened to them in this process.
It's a watershed moment that could be good for all parties. I think Hyundai's execution was surreptitious. In the dark of night, they came to market.
Yeah.
You thinking they had, it's Amazon, so we can do no wrong.
Right.
I think they're underestimating the clout that dealers have. Now is the time for state dealer associations and NADA to collaborate together, utilize the franchise laws, not to defeat Amazon, not
Right.
to defeat Hyundai and all these OEMs.
Just to hold them accountable.
Hold them accountable, create a model that works for everyone,
Right.
including the longevity of the dealer. Let the consumer have the seamless end-to-end transaction to the extent feasible. That's going
Right.
to take a lot of work because it's not an easy thing to do.
That's right.
But otherwise, dealers are going to be forced into a corner. They're going to put a stop to it. It'll take 3 or 4 years for it to work out. That doesn't help anybody.
That's
So
right.
I think
I wholeheartedly agree. This is a time to support your local, your state associations and NADA on topics. This specific topic, obviously other topics and issues, I should say, as well. I've spoken to a number of friends of mine that own Hyundai dealerships. I said, hey, I'd love to get you on air. And they're like, oh, no. What I just said on the phone to you, there's no way, Jim, I'm saying that on air, because I want more stores. I want more Hyundai stores. I don't want to be perceived as the troublemaker.
Well,
However, here's how I
that.
feel, and I won't mention them by name. And a lot of them are very big dealers and represent big dealer groups. But they don't want, so they need that voice of that state association and NADA to say, hey, wait a minute, we don't want more stores, so we can tell it like it is. So
that's a very typical reaction. I've gotten that for 35 years.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Call me, I tell them their rights, they think about it, and then they say, you know what, I want to buy another store. I want.
That's right. I want to get approved on more.
There
Yes.
comes a point. Yeah, there comes a point, however, when you get to this stage where it's do or die, right? So if you don't fight, what are you fighting for? To get another Hyundai store that's going to be equally unprofitable because of this model is going to go unchallenged. So there comes a point where I think people have to decide, this is the event that everyone should join together and invoke their rights, not to defeat this new paradigm, but to make it work to everybody's benefit.
That's right.
So it's up to the dealers, quite honestly,
Yeah.
and the dealer associations and NADA to make that happen. But it would be a shame for this opportunity to go by, have the process go forward without the dealers' input, wind up having dealers do very poorly because the model has all these flaws in it. And then the only winners are Amazon and not even the consumer, because consumer's not getting what they think they're getting based on the current model. So who really benefits? I don't even think Hyundai benefits. I think it's the next manufacturer, because If consumers for Hyundai can't be properly serviced and they are frustrated because they have to go back to the dealer or they can't get financing or their equity in their lease return isn't being rolled over and they can't get a price that they can afford, who's going to benefit?
Right.
Hyundai's competitors are going to, Kia is going to benefit.
Right.
Nissan's going to benefit. So everyone has a stake. This is not anti-Hyundai. It's not anti-Amazon. The model has to be rolled out in a thoughtful way, not in the dark of night. And everyone who has a stake in the outcome should have a seat at the table. So that's my message to my clients anyway.
And we are going to leave it there. Len Bellavia, founding partner, Bellavia Blatt, attorneys at law. That's why we bring you in here, man. You have got the goods. You know, because you have been down this road before, defending dealers all over the country. We appreciate all the time that you've given us. I've got like 7 more questions here that I want to run by you that time won't allow me to do, but I'd love to have you back to do a follow-up on this, because this is a very hot topic right now. Dealers need to pay attention to it in a very big way, and contact your state associations and NADA and say, how can I help? Because this is something that I think every dealer needs to pay attention to. So,
Jim, I agree. It's been a pleasure. Always topical issues we have to discuss. So this is about as big as it gets.
That's right. That's right.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching Inside Automotive with Jim Fitzpatrick.